Unapologetically Gangster, the Don Kawand story. Book 1, subtitle, Marlboro and Coney Island, Story 25. Now by the end of my sophomore year, in the summer of '85, my chocolate cupcake and I would call it quits after close to 2 years of a lustful and bonding relationship. We would go our separate ways. The horny young boys in the projects were all over her. They acted as if I'd thrown some raw meat into a shark tank. It was no surprise because she was gorgeous and had the body of a grown lady. While she was moving on, so was I. Early that summer, I would move like a wild animal in heat that had been let out of a cage. First, I would touch 2 beautiful dark-skinned sisters that lived on the other side of the projects. They both would come for my flesh. They both flirted with me within the same week. Both served their untouched flesh up to me as a young boy that was feeling himself. They brought pleasure to my young life and vanished just as fast. They schemed on me because they were both one-hitter-quitter situations, and neither of us mentioned it again until now. I've never had a conversation with either of them about it, but there was no hard feelings. And yes, I had a hungry appetite for beautiful dark-skinned females. Then I had a brief episode with another girl from the other side that I truly liked. But this young girl was foolish. Therefore, she was also a one-hitter quitter, even though I would have loved to have had a relationship with her. She was a sexy brown-skinned girl with a beautiful smile that loved to scrap, something I wasn't into after the experience with Mr. Maniac and my mama love as a young boy. So I did nothing when she dug her sharp nails into my skin one day after being angry about something that I can't even remember. After the second altercation, she forced me to walk away from the situation. I'm not even going to mention her name because she might want to scrap with me, even in my wheelchair. But the whorish little boy inside of me was born the summer of 1985 after hemming up my next door neighbor who had eyes on me for some time. Although we never committed to a boyfriend and girlfriend relationship, she gave me access to that hot spot at random. I would also tag and get up close in person with 2 young girls from Building 1. One of them would get the outdoor experience after taking her to the bleachers of Lafayette High School, only because I heard the boys around me talking about the excitement of an outdoor rendezvous. Yes, I was creeping and in high demand with the young girls in Marlboro. It appeared as if they were waiting for me to break up with my chocolate cupcake, just like the horny young boys that were all over her. But then things would change halfway through the summer of '85 as an old love would enter my life for a short but sweet moment, although I would have to venture out to one of the most dangerous projects in Brooklyn. This is the end of Story 25, the Don Kawand story. Unapologetically Gangster, the Don Kawand story. Book 1, subtitle, Marlboro and Coney Island, Story 26. Whenever I wasn't getting into trouble or hanging out with the fellas at 30 Rock or Coney Island, I enjoyed the company of a young girl. After a few episodes with a few locals, a young girl that occupied space in the back of my head came through. We had not seen each other since the 5th grade. She was actually my very first girlfriend in PS 248 and in Marlboro. I thought I'd never see her again after tragedy entered her life. I'd just come out of my building and was headed toward 30 Rock as usual. Halfway to the building, she stepped out of the lobby of 30 Rock. Our eyes locked on one another and a smile grew on her face. She was headed in my direction and her smile grew bigger as she grew closer toward me. Her pretty light-skinned complexion was glowing through the bright sun that had been shining that day. As a kid, she lived in 30 Rock and was the first and only girl to pass me a note in class that read,
"Hi, Kawand. I think you're cute. Would you like to be my boyfriend?"
check yes, no, or maybe so was underneath the question with 3 boxes for me to check one. At the bottom of the note, she signed her name neatly using my last name. Now you know how it used to be back in them days. If you don't, too bad. She was a pretty light-skinned girl with some cute dimples and had the body of Serena Williams, but in a smaller version. Therefore, I put a mark on the box that said yes. We'd hang out on the 9th floor where she lived, kissing and smooching over a game of spin the bottle. I would be the only boy with her and a couple of Spanish girls that lived next door to her. Yes, I had been a horny little boy since the 5th grade, but never got past bumping and grinding until I was an early teenager. But one weekend, after staying at a family member's house, would return to Marlboro to some very bad news. She had moved out of the projects. Unfortunately, her beautiful dark-skinned mom had passed away. I was heartbroken because it was sudden and her location became a mystery. A sweet older lady that lived next door to her that knew she was my little girlfriend told me that she had moved into the pink houses. She and her sister were now living with one of their aunts. This sweet lady relayed messages to me from time to time about their well-being, and it eventually stopped. Therefore, seeing her years later brought joy to that day. She was no longer an innocent little girl from elementary school. She was a full-blown teenager and built like a grown lady at the age of 16. She had a huge, pretty smile on her face. Once in front of me, she was the first one to speak.
Hey, Kawand, do you remember me?
Of course, you used to be my girlfriend in the 5th grade, I responded with a smile. It was good to see her. We had a very long conversation that day on a bench that was in between Building 1 and Building 2. She confessed to wanting to run into me when she came to Marlboro. After the conversation, she would become my shorty that summer, although brief. By the end of our conversation, she'd invite me to come visit her at the Pink Houses. Now, the Pink Houses was on the other side of town from Marlboro, located in East New York, and had a very bad reputation. I knew it was a dangerous place to go, but it did not stop me from going to check her. I moved through the projects with my hand gripped tightly on a knife while looking for her address. And when I finally reached the apartment, we had that long-awaited, lustful moment. It was passionate, unlike with the young girls I had earlier in the summer of '85. For the next few days, we spent a great deal of time on the phone and seeing each other as much as possible, while her aunt and uncle were out of town for 2 weeks. But one day, after hanging out in Coney Island Amusement Park, we headed back to the Lion's Den in Marlboro. We were pulling ourselves together after some intense belly rubbing, if you know what I mean. Just before we went to take a shower, there was a loud knock on the door, something that was unusual. She went ahead without me as I hurried to get rid of whoever was disturbing my special moment. I screamed through the closed door, "Yo, who is it?"
Peace, King. Yo, this is G.
When I opened up the door, standing in front of me was Gamal, aka G, a bona fide gangster from 30 Rock. He played no games and was one of the few kids that had been in and out of jail before the age of 16. Gamal was fresh off a juvenile bid and wanted to hang out. The conversation baffled me because we had never done anything together before this day. He knocked on my door out of nowhere. We didn't go to school together or do anything memorable, although we knew each other from me hanging around 30 Rock. His attitude and roughness merged with my willingness to be violent, made for a deadly combination. We would become a two-headed monster, sending our victims straight to ICU. This is the end of story 26, the Don Kawand story. Unapologetically Gangster, the Don Kawand story. Book 1, subtitle, Marlboro and Coney Island, story 27. Now back to the gangster. Gamal, aka G, was a certified bad boy that knocked on my door one day out of the blue. He had interrupted a happy moment, but it was good to see the homie. G was a little taller than me, a handsome brown-skinned dude with hazel eyes. Since he was fresh out of a juvenile camp, his body was completely swollen, like a professional bodybuilder. The boy stayed fly, just like myself. He was a wild child, and his entire family was about that street life. It's 5 of them. He had 2 older brothers, Hashim and Hiala, and 2 sisters, Shannon and Kim. And unfortunately, they were all victims of the system. But back to G. He was looking brand new, and oddly enough, I remembered the day he went to jail. While standing in the back of 30 Rock and watching from a distance, it took almost 6 police officers to put handcuffs on this boy. They had a hard time getting him in the back of the car. While they was trying to get him in the back of the vehicle, he was screaming for someone to go get his moms. The boy took a serious ass whooping this day before they finally got him in the back of the vehicle and and drove off as if it was a kidnapping. Come to think of it, that's probably why he came to see me first. After knocking on my door, I quickly explained the situation. We agreed to catch up with one another later on, and when we did, would embark on some real live gangster shit throughout Brooklyn. Man, listen, we caught wreck everywhere. We beat, robbed, and cut a few people together. And he was with me the first time I clapped a boy that ended up on life support. Yes, it was a vicious time in my young life. I truly don't even know where to begin. Therefore, I'm going to start with the brutal fist fight we had with each other. My dude G was always up for an adventure on a train to either downtown Brooklyn or somewhere across town. The boy was fearless, just like myself. Together we were dangerous. This fight would actually bond us for life. Well, actually, the brawl we had with some white kids on the train tracks is what really bonded us. But I'm getting ahead of myself with the stories. Yes, you heard me right. We fought with some white boys, not only on the train tracks, but in the dark, grungy, rat-infested tunnels. It was crazy. Every now and then, two alpha lions have to bump heads in order to establish some mutual respect. And that's what happened with G and myself. While at Atlantic Avenue train station, we would bump heads. The fight started over a Heineken hat that his older brother Hiallah let me sport. Hiallah was a career criminal, but boosting clothing and fashionable coats is why he was always fly and kept something in his stash. Since we were like family, he had no problem letting me hold anything. G and I were headed to Atlantic Terminals this day, just blocks away from the infamous Brooklyn Big Clock. We were still in the Atlantic Avenue train station when he asked to hold the hat before us leaving the train station. Well, since I didn't get the hat from him, didn't feel the need to let him hold it, and he felt since it was his brother's, he was entitled to it. So we start arguing, and he snatches the hat off my head. He had the hat in his hand when I grabbed it back. Now we are tussling hard over the hat, and this dude begins popping plenty shit. We are making a scene as dozens of people are passing by. We were giving them something to talk about at the dinner table. This boy then threatened to put hands on me, something I didn't take kind to. When I didn't let the hat go, he suggested that we leave the train station so he can beat me to the white meat. It was an invite that I was definitely looking forward to seeing. He thought because he had some muscles and spent some time in a juvenile camp that he could mishandle me, but my knuckle game was no joke. I'd been sparring and knuckling up with bigger dudes for a couple of years before the challenge he put in front of me. The boy from the 5th floor in 30 Rock wanted to test my hand skills. Once upstairs and out of the train station, we maneuvered to Sarah J. Hale High School Park. Neither one of us wanted any interruptions, and I was loving every moment with each step we took. He was talking greasy the entire time. The verbal assault was filled with all kinds of violence and profanity as he threatened all kinds of bodily harm to me. Do all of that to me. I just kept hurling back the slick and greasy comments, only because it had never happened to me, and it wasn't happening on that date neither. There was no one around but the two of us. Once we got into the schoolyard, we went toe to toe like big boys. He was tossing them juvenile camp hammers and trying to take my head off, but I maneuvered around every blow and then almost broke his nose. My hands launched a few well-coordinated rights and lefts, and one landed directly on the button of his face. He wobbled and tried to grab, but I sidestepped it. Blood began leaking out of his nose as he was in a daze, and only because he was my man that I didn't go in for the kill. He was hurt badly. Blood was dripping fast and hard from his nose, so he couldn't continue. He tilted his head back to try to stop it from bleeding, but never stopped talking shit. He continued the verbal assaults and threats as he did his best to pull himself together, but he never did. I was more than ready for another round, but it took him a while to recuperate. Now this might sound crazy, but we hung out for the rest of the day anyway. We was throwing threats at one another the entire time, but I enjoyed the pleasure of wearing the Heineken hat. It wasn't until that evening when we arrived back in Marlboro that we got it on for a second time. Without any warning, after exiting the N train station at 86th Street, he snuffed me. This dude from the juvenile camp punched me hard to the right side of my face, and it rocked me. but I was still standing. We tussled for a few minutes before someone came and broke the fight up. After someone broke up the fight, we hit the nearest store and got a couple of 40 ounces. That day we discovered that both of us were warriors. It had to take place to earn one another's respect. The next morning, he was still my man. Unlike Rel, where most of our drama took place in Marlboro, our shenanigans took place everywhere in Brooklyn. We went back to back or bum rushed anybody that entered our circle the wrong way. And it didn't matter if we was in Marlboro or not. We would be a problem. This is the end of story 27, the Don Kawand story. Now make sure you subscribe, click like, and share, because somebody needs to hear this story.